Hello people, my name is Rage, and welcome one and all back to some Whispers of the Old Gods, goodliness, hype, discussion-y, and just all-round, which I imagine is playing on loop in every old god's head. Like, you've gotta be good at evil laughing if you're a massively powerful evil entity that drives all who look upon you mad. I'm just saying, and I have to say, I am loving this expansion so far. Every card that gets revealed is just bursting with flavor, much like our first card, the Tentacle of N'Zoth. Although the image of N'Zoth's tentacle bursting with anything is quite awful, so we'll rapidly move on from that. A 1-mana 1/1 is obviously quite poor, so it needs some extra kick to give it that worthwhileness, and it does have that. A lovely 1 damage across the board when it dies, so it'll do 2 damage to whatever it attacks, which is about standard for a 1-mana card, and then you get the added bonus of cleaving down the low-cost, low-health minions, and that's really good. Honestly, I love this card. I think it is a certainly adequate early-game aggro deterrent, and I can see it being played a fairly large amount. I really can. I am genuinely quite happy with it. I like the tentacle. The tentacle is good. Alright, moving on then, we have the world's most adorable little card, the Blood of N'Zoth. It just, I mean, look at it. It's so kawaii. It's just amazing. And honestly, it isn't even that bad of a card. A 2/2 for 3 is obviously really terrible, but a death rattle that is effectively the competitive Spirit Secret bundled in, that makes it pretty worthwhile for 3 mana, because 2 bad things bundled together generally make a good thing. Look at Muster for Battle. So I like this, and when we look at N'Zoth himself in a second, you'll see that this card is actually really good and filled with a lot of potential. If you've got a aggressive start, you've got a 1-mana minion down, you've got maybe a 2-mana 1 down as well, maybe you coined an extra 1-mana out and then you whack this down on turn 3, your opponent is now having to make an awkward decision, clear everything but the blood, and that might require more resources than they have available to them, or kind of just try and ignore it and hope that it doesn't bite them in the ass, and this adorable little tentacle beast is most certainly going to bite them in the ass. Don't get me wrong, it's not amazing, but it's good enough, especially when you play it in a death rattle N'Zoth the Corruptor deck. Look at this bad boy. A 10-mana 5/7 is obviously horrible, but he has got one hell of a battle cry. Interesting side note, this is the first time we've seen N'Zoth properly realized in a Blizzard game. He's not even done anything major or had a proper appearance in WoW yet, so this is quite cool for me to actually see him in something properly. I'm liking it. So he seems to be all about them death rattles. It's a anything can happen, but for death rattle minions. So playing this, it's like a 10-mana spell that comes with a 5/7 attached, which is really good. A 5/7 plus 6 random death rattles? That's not bad for 10 mana. You're going to get quite an impressive board off that, especially if you're playing some of the meatier death rattle minions that are in the game. So I genuinely think N'Zoth is actually really good and probably will inspire some very cool, heavily late game death rattle control-y decks, which do support using his tentacle and it support using his blood. So I'm really liking where they're going with N'Zoth, and I can see myself having a lot of fun experimenting with this card and the kind of decks that he can be in. So good on you, old god of corruptingness, which doesn't make sense because every old god corrupts, but I guess N'Zoth is very good at it. To be fair, N'Zoth is arguably the most powerful old god. He waged a war against 2 others at once and held his own mightily, so I kinda like this guy. He's pretty impressive, and as such should be an impressive card. Next up we have Infested Tauren. A 4-mana 2/3 that summons a 2/2 slime that doesn't even have taunt. It's a worse Sludge Belcher. It's a worse Shredder. It's just terrible. It's 2/3 for 4 is awful. This could easily be a 3/4, and then it would maybe be kind of average, but it's just bad. You do not want to play a Yeti that is broken up into 2 parts for 4 mana. You just don't. It's not good enough. If the slime that came out of it had a special effect, even just taunt, it would be immensely better, but it doesn't. It's just too little bang for your buck, and while I love Tauren and I like Tentacle Tauren, that nearly sounded so wrong. It's just not good enough. It really isn't. Maybe if aggro is so prevalent that a double summon taunty card that doesn't even get a second taunt is needed, maybe, but you'd just rather play a Tazdingo. Honestly, you really would, so no, it's just not great. Next up, we have the Faceless Shambler. Taunt and then Battlecry, copy a friendly minion's attack and health. This is very neat, honestly. It's got a lot of potential, because based on the wording, there's every chance you can't silence off this guy's adopted stats. You can only silence off the taunt, so that gives him some potential. If you can use him on, say, Eerie Statue, or hell, even the Ancient Watcher, if you've got a couple of them down in the early game, if you're playing a more defensive deck. I mean, he even works wonderfully with Power Overwhelming, because he doesn't copy the effects, he just copies the +4/4 stats, and that's really awesome. So I like this guy. He's not crazy strong, but I think he's probably as good as Manipulator, and definitely has a lot of potential, so I'm excited to see him used. I'm not that sure he'll be that competitive, but I think someone's going to come up with a really niche, neat way to use him, and it's going to be quite powerful, so I'm excited for that card. Next up then, we have our first non-old god, no, not even our first, it's our second non-old god neutral legendary after Hogger, and it is the Boogie Monster! The Boogie Monster, but the Boogie Monster sounds much better. I need it to just be funky and dancing constantly. This thing is awful. A 6/7 for 8 is awful. His effect when he attacks and kills another minion, gets 2/2, is awful. If it was whenever he destroys a minion, so if you attack it and don't kill it, it gains 2/2, then maybe it leaps into the realms of viability, but currently it's gonna die the turn after you play it. It's not gonna get to kill anything, and even if it does kill something that had, let's say, 1 damage, so it becomes an 8/8 after killing it, you've played 1 card and 2 turns of waiting to kill a 1/1 to get an 8/8, which is just worse than Ragnaros. I don't get this card. I really don't. Even in amazing situations where it survived and you've Wind Furied it and you're going mental, it's still not gonna be great. After killing 2 things, it'll be what, like a 10/5? Yay! It's just, I don't get it. It's not a good card, and it's just honestly a filler flavor legendary. Next up then, a couple of warrior cards, and they're certainly something. We have N'Zoth's First Mate, not a Death Rattle, despite being related to the Death Rattle Old God, which is interesting. A 1/1/1, which as we know is not great unless it does something else, and we get a 1 free weapon. And this is a perfect example of 2 bad things coming together to be a good thing. You get an upgrade weapon plus a 1/1. Individually, they both suck, but bundle them both for 1 mana, and it's not bad. If we have an incredibly aggressive metagame with lots of 1 health minions, being able to kill 3 of them from turn 1 as a warrior is honestly really not horrible. I mean, yes, you can then play Fiery War Axe on turn 2, but this could actually give you the ability to maybe, I know this is crazy, cut a copy of Fiery War Axe, but we'll have to see how the meta plays out. It's not an incredible card, but it's certainly not bad, and I can definitely see a scenario in which these see a lot of play. Next up, we have the most absurd weapon in creation, Tentacles for Arms. Now, don't get me wrong, this is hilarious and I love it, but a 5-mana 2/2 weapon, this better have an incredible effect then, and it just doesn't. Return to your hand so you can, what, play another 5-mana terrible weapon? Why? It's just, I don't get it. If it was return it to your hand and give it +2 attack, then maybe. So you end up with a 4/2, then a 6/2, and it starts being really threatening. But even if it was a 5-mana 2 attack, infinite durability, it wouldn't even be that good. I mean, a few situations where you could make that broken, I guess, but still, it's just not good. It's hilarious, don't get me wrong, but it should be 3 mana for what it is. It really should. 5 mana for 2/2, no matter the fact that you get to play it infinitely, unless there is some ridiculous warrior weapon synergy that requires you to have one equipped that we've not had revealed yet. It's just not a great card, it really isn't. And I am deliberately trying to keep these brief, guys. As I just hinted at with Tentacles for Arms, until we know the entire set, it's impossible to evaluate everything relatively, so I'm just giving my quick first impressions of a card. I'd love you guys to get in-depth discussion in the comments. Next up, we have Doom, which is a 10 mana Twisting Nether with the added bonus that you get to draw a card for everything you killed for that 2 extra mana. Which actually makes it a much worse card than Twisting Nether, because you play this card in a control warlock, and when you get to 10 mana in a control game, the last thing that you want to do as a warlock who's already been drawing lots of cards is surge draw your way to fatigue much faster than your opponent, and you'd rather just play Twisting Nether if you wanted the board clear. For Doom to be worth it, it would have to silence as well as kill. Then you could see some good use for this. I hope it's got a badass animation. I mean, it's got Xaril in the picture, so I'm hoping he makes an appearance, and I love the card from a coolness standpoint, but I just don't think it's better than Twisting Nether in 9 out of 10 situations. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my impression of the card. Next up, one of my favorite cards that has been announced, Renounce Darkness. Replace all your Warlock cards and hero power with a different classes and then make the cards cost 1 less. This is hilarious. It's either an amazing card or a bad card. You get a deck full of 7 mana Tyrians, you've won the game. You get a deck full of I don't know, 1 mana, in fact, no, 2 mana Shady Dealers of Rogues, you're probably not going to do well. There's much worse outcomes than that, but for some reason the Shady Dealer was the first thing to come to mind. Not that that means anything, shut up. But it's just hilarious. I love this card. I am going to use this a lot for the pure just factor of it, and that's no bad thing. Renounce Darkness, I love it. You can't evaluate this card. It depends entirely on what you get. I mean, I could definitely see a 30-card Warlock deck that relies on drawing Renounce Darkness near the beginning to just get a really cheap, hopefully effective deck, but I don't know, but it's just brilliant. Next up, we have a new Hunter card then, Infest. 3 mana, give your minions Death Rattle, add a random beast to your hand. So, for 3 mana, give everything on your field the Web Spinner effect. I like this. Honestly, this is a pretty good card. It's quite cheaply costed, and as long as you have 2 or more minions, it pays for itself. It really does. So in a slower control Hunter, I think you'll definitely see at least one of these cards. I mean, imagine Double Ball of Spider and then Infest. That is some serious beast action for the cost of the cards you've played, although that's the slowest combo in the world, but it would be quite amusing to draw a bajillion beasts off everything dying. But either way, I like the card, it's pretty good, and it'll see some use. Next up, we have the Shaman Legendary, who, is just amazing, and it makes me happy. Shamans are allowed a good card that doesn't have 5,000 overload on it. A 4/6 for 5 is pretty reasonable and good stats, with GVG and Naxxramas taken away from the meta, so I'm really happy with that. And then the effect of gaining health whenever your spells do damage is wonderful. This plus a Lightning Storm, you clear the board, you have a 4/6, you get about 10 health back, it's just wonderful. Elemental Destruction is obviously a hell load of healing, but, you know, more than likely will kill your own Ascended, but it has a lot of cool uses, and I think you'll see this in a lot of Shaman decks. It's a very, very, very powerful legendary, and I'm excited Shaman has got it. Next up, we have the Undercity. I mean, to be fair, before we move on instantly to this, there is a potential that even though it's really good itself in a vacuum, so is something like the Mistcaller, and the Mistcaller doesn't see that much play. So it does worry me that even if it's amazing, it might not be synergistic or just quite good enough to slot into a deck, but I really want Shaman to get a proper good control deck again, and this guy really helps towards that. Either way, Undercity Huckster, a rogue card. Add a random class card to your hand from your opponent's class. 2 mana 2/2 Death Rattle that does that. Good. You know, it's a mad scientist for a random card from your opponents. It's fine, it's well done, the art looks terrible, but, you know, that's okay. I'm sure rogues can get over that, and I will definitely be playing them. It fills a nice niche of just something to whack down on 2 mana as a rogue that also gives you your card back for playing it, and potentially something much, much better than the 2 mana 2/2. It's just a good, solid card, and it'll be seen in a lot of rogue decks. I really, really like it. Moving on then, we have the rogue legendary, the Poisoned Mind. Ooh, I love this guy. He looks badass. I think he is a boss in WoW. I could be wrong on that though, but his battle cry and death rattle is add a random poison to your hand. So, a 4 mana 3/2 is obviously pretty terrible, but it's worth 2 mana. And then you get 2 of these 1 mana poisons, and that way you're getting 4 mana worth of stuff for 4 mana. So you may think, well, that's not very legendary strength, that's just average strength. But the 1 mana cards you get are these 1 mana awesome poison spells. And the thing about rogue is they love 1 mana spells to get effects and trigger their combos. And there are some very good poisons. You've got a Blessing of Might, you've got an Arcane Shot, you've got a 1 mana just draw a card, which is amazing. You've got a spare part for stealth, and you've got a thingy-mabob. I've actually forgotten what the 4th one is called because I'm a moron. One moment, everybody. We've got ourselves a almost as good Shadow Step, which is pretty good as well. The stealth one is probably the worst, but you'll never be too unhappy about getting 2 of these. It's definitely very worth, and I think it'll see a lot of play. It's a very, very solid card with a lot of combo potential. And then finally, we have the Priest Legendary, Herald Volazj. I mean, who can say, like, Old God Faceless One stuff? You're not supposed to be able to say them, goddammit! So this is a 6 mana 5/5, which isn't horrible. I mean, it's what Sylvanas is. And as you know with Sylvanas, if the effect is good enough, that is fine. So the stats aren't terrible. And then the battle cry is summon a 1/1 copy of each of your other minions. So this is quite hilarious. Say you've got a Ragnaros on the field, you play this, and then you get a 1/1 Ragnaros that still has the deal 8 damage effect. So it's just a tiny little Ragnaros going, die, insects! And that's just brilliant to imagine. I don't know how good this will be, because you need to have a fairly solid board full of good effect minions to then play this and then get copies of them, and it seems like a lot of setup for honestly not that much payout, but we'll have to see. It's definitely an interesting card, but I do think it's by far and away the weakest class legendary that has been revealed so far. But yeah, there you go, that's the Herald. So that's the current cards that have been revealed this week. Let me know what you think of them, and let me know what you think of all the cards that have probably been released while I've been making this video, so I've missed them. Yay! But I have to say, Old Gods is looking fantastic so far, so I am very excited for it. My name has been Rage. Like if you enjoyed this, and subscribe for more. Goodbye.